I'll say something that sounds arrogant, then spend the rest of this video proving it. You have never actually invented a war in your fantasy world. Not one. Every conflict you think you dreamed up was handed to you by your own map. The pass you set between two kingdoms. The river you forced them to share. You just didn't catch the map suggesting it. World builders pour everything into the politics and treat the map as the stage it all happens on. But the map is the script, and almost nobody reads it. Once you do, you stop guessing where your wars go and start finding the ones that were always there. Go back far enough and you'll find the proof carved into stone. About 4,500 years ago, two cities in southern Mesopotamia, Umma and Lagash, spent generations fighting over one strip of good farmland between them. There had been a border once. An earlier king walked the line, set a marker stone, and everyone agreed it was settled. Then one side's ruler pulled that stone out of the ground, marched his army across, and took the field. And we know all of this for a very specific reason. The winning side carved the whole grievance into a monument. Who moved the stone? Whose land it was? Which god was furious about it? That carving is, as far as we know, the oldest war anybody ever bothered to write down. So sit with what that means. One of the very first things humans thought worth carving into stone forever was a fight over a line on the ground. And that's the whole idea right there. Nobody sat in a room and invented that war. The war was already there, lying in the dirt between two cities that both needed the same patch of soil. The geography wrote it. The people just showed up and acted it out. This is the thing that took me embarrassingly long to understand about my own maps. I used to treat the map as the easy, fun part, draw the coastline, scatter a few mountains around, and then treat the politics as this separate, agonizing job I had to bolt on afterward. Who hates who? Why are they at war? I'd just make something up, and it always felt made up because it was. And reading power off a map is something people have studied seriously for over a century. It's basically its own academic field. A geographer named Halford Mackinder stood up more than 100 years ago and argued that the big contests of history, who rises and who gets swallowed, are sitting right there in the terrain, if you know how to look. And it's shaped how we read conflict ever since. So the rule I want you to carry through the rest of this is simple. Terrain creates pressure and pressure becomes conflict. A mountain wall or a river, two kingdoms both depend on. Each one quietly leans on the people living around it, pushing them towards some fights and away from others. Your map is a pressure system, and it's leaning on everyone who lives on it all the time. Once you can feel where it's pushing, you stop asking, what's in this place? And start asking the only question that actually generates a story. What does this place make people do to each other? So which fights are already on your map? There are 4 that show up on almost every map ever drawn. The real ones and the invented ones both, because the same handful of features show up on all of them. Let's walk through them. Start with the simplest one, because once you see it, you'll see it everywhere. I call it the gate. Picture a single bridge over a deep, fast river, and it's the only crossing for 100 miles in either direction. Anyone who wants to move an army, a caravan, a fleeing princess, anyone at all, has to come through that one spot. So ask the obvious question, who's standing on the bridge? Whoever it is just became one of the most powerful people in the region, purely by standing on the one spot that matters. Their power is position, they hold the door, and everyone else needs the door. If you've read A Song of Ice and Fire, this is exactly what House Frey is. A grasping, charmless family that got obscenely rich and obscenely hated for one reason. Because they built their towers on the only bridge across a river everyone needs to cross. And the single most shocking thing in that entire series happens right there, at the castle that holds that bridge. It happens there because of what a bridge is. This is no fantasy contrivance either. It's maybe the most reliable pattern in all of real history. And we even have a name for these spots. Choke points. The Strait of Hormuz is a gap of water about 21 miles wide, and roughly a quarter of all the oil that moves by sea has to squeeze through it, which is why it's permanently exhaustingly contested, with fleets parked at both ends and everyone on edge. The Bosphorus, the narrow throat of water that's the only way in or out of the Black Sea, has shaped the wars of that whole region for thousands of years. In the early 1500s, the Portuguese took the strait at Hormuz, and basically ran a toll booth on the Gulf's trade. Pay us or you don't pass. And it helped them choke the rivals who used to control those routes. So when you set a mountain pass between two kingdoms, or draw one bridge across a river nobody can ford, understand what you've actually done. You've planted a permanent argument. Whoever holds the gate gets rich and gets hated, and everyone forced to pass through it is waiting for the day they can take it or go around it. That's a siege waiting to happen, and a war waiting for a reason. Now flip it around. Instead of a place that's too narrow to get through, picture one that's too open to defend. Imagine a kingdom on a wide flat plain. No mountains, no coastline, nothing on the horizon but more horizon. Sounds peaceful, but it's the exact opposite, because a nation like that has a nightmare baked into it. There's no line to hold. The enemy can come from any direction, any time, and the land does nothing to slow them down. You don't even have to imagine how a country like that behaves, because we've got a real one. Russia's heartland sits on a giant open plain, something like 400,000 square miles of flat ground, with barely a serious hill the whole way from the German border to Moscow. So for centuries it was the highway invader after invader took, the Poles, then Napoleon walking 600,000 men in, then Hitler doing the same thing all over again a century later. And when the land won't protect you, you get paranoid, and the paranoia has its own cold logic. You push your borders outward, grabbing a ring of smaller countries to stand between you and the next army. That's a flat map manufacturing a frightened, hungry empire, one that conquers because it's terrified. Which, by the way, is a far more interesting villain than a dark lord who wants the world just because he's evil. From here then, turn to your rivers for the third predefined fight. Because one of them is probably a weapon you've never noticed. A river feels like a pure gift, free water and a tidy natural border. But a river starts somewhere and ends somewhere, which means somebody lives upstream and somebody lives downstream. And the people upstream can choke the people below them whenever they feel like it. Damn it. And the kingdom downstream is suddenly negotiating for its life. That downstream kingdom can have the bigger army and the richer cities, and none of it matters because their neighbor's hand is on the tap. This is not some hypothetical, and you can probably guess where the oldest example comes from. It's that same fight between Umma and Lagash over the irrigation canals. It never stopped being a thing either. When Turkey built a huge dam on the Euphrates, the flow into Syria downstream dropped something like 40% while they filled the reservoir. Egypt has spent years genuinely rattled over a dam Ethiopia built upstream on the Nile, because the Nile simply is Egypt, always has been. So if you've got a river running through two kingdoms on your map, you've already written a slow simmering cold war, and all it takes is one dry summer to turn it hot. The upstream kingdom never even has to raise a sword. That's the most subtle, most patient kind of power there is. Last but not least, there's my favorite, the one I still want to build a whole novel around eventually. It's basically about the least powerful place on the whole map. The small, weak country with the rotten luck of standing between two strong ones. This poor kingdom didn't do anything wrong. Its only crime is its address. When two great powers get nervous about each other, the ground between them becomes the place they shove against, the buffer, the crumble zone, the board where they fight a war neither one wants to fight directly at home. Real history is stuffed with these. Belgium got used as the doormat. Germany marched across to get at France. Twice in a single century in 2 world wars. Afghanistan got ground between the British and Russian empires so thoroughly that the rivalry earned its own nickname, the Great Game. And for a writer, this squeezed little country is the richest ground on the map, because the pressure never once lets up. Every choice its people make is forced. Pick a side and you're a target. Stay neutral and you're a doormat to both. Your protagonist grows up knowing their homeland survives on cleverness, because it will never survive on strength. And that's a character under real pressure from the very first page, handed to you for free, just for being honest about where they live. So that's 4 fights already sitting on your map. The gate everyone wants, the open plain nobody can defend, the river one neighbor can choke, and the little country caught in the middle. And once you've found them, the next move is to make them feel real. To give that pass and that border river and that doomed little kingdom names that sound like places people have actually fought and died over. That's the whole reason I put together the Free Word Almanac. It's a lexicon of evocative, half-forgotten words to help you name the courts and ruins of your world so they land like real history instead of placeholder. It's free down in the description, so grab it whenever you like. Anyway, back to the map. Let's zoom out because so far I've been handing you these fights one at a time, and that's not how a map actually works. They all sit there at once on the same piece of paper, and when you stack them up, something bigger appears. The whole balance of power, already decided for you. Put all 4 on one map and the roles sort themselves out. The kingdoms holding the gates and sprawling across the open plains are your predators, your great powers. The little buffer states and the downstream kingdoms living at the mercy of someone else's dam are your prey. The terrain handed out those roles long before you got there, and it reaches even further, because geography decides who counts as enemies in the first place. There's a reason India and China, 2 giant neighbors who've never much trusted each other, have never fought an all-out war, despite a long and bitterly disputed border. They had one short, sharp clash high in the mountains back in 1962, and a few tense standoffs since, but never the full-scale war you'd expect between two rivals that size. A big part of the reason is the tallest mountains on the planet, sitting right between them. The Himalayas do the diplomacy. Where there's a wall like that, the big war mostly doesn't happen. Where the ground lies open, it happens constantly. Same lesson, opposite terrain. Which gets at something I love about borders, and it's a bit of a paradox. A good natural border, a mountain range, a wide river, is two opposite things at the same time. It's a wall, because it keeps armies out and the peace in. And it's a fault line, because it's the exact seam two peoples will harden against each other along, where the one pass or ford through it becomes the most fought over scrap of ground for centuries. Same feature, a wall on a calm day, a fault line on a bad one. But the deepest version of this idea is the one I think most world builders miss completely. The map doesn't only write the wars you have now, it writes the wars you haven't had yet, because the pressure never goes away, but the world around it keeps moving. The mountain pass that's worthless today becomes priceless the morning someone strikes gold on the far side of it. A river silts up and the trade reroutes overnight, and two kingdoms that used to be comfortable partners are suddenly at each other's throats over the new road, because the map moved underneath them. A border that's been a peaceful wall for 200 years turns into a flashpoint the day a hungry new power rises on the other side. So your map is really a clock. The next war is already ticking away inside it, and the terrain set the alarm a long time ago. Now, before this tips over into me telling you geography is destiny and your characters are just driftwood on the current, let me be clear, because this is the one place the whole way of thinking goes wrong. The map sets the pressure, it doesn't make the decision. A flat, indefensible border makes a war likely, it does not make it happen. Some king still has to choose to march, and some other king still has to choose how to answer. And that gap, between the pressure the land creates and the choice a person makes about it, that gap is exactly where your real story lives. The geography hands you a loaded situation. Your characters are the ones who decide what to do with it. So treat it as a compass. It points at where the pressure already is. So you can decide on purpose what your people do when they finally feel it. And if reading one map like this clicks for you, finding the gates and the open plains and the chokeable rivers, then weaving them into a living web of who fears who, and you want to build a whole world this way, top to bottom, that's the entire reason I built my world building system. The module on politics and power and the one on geography go exactly this deep, just across a complete world instead of a single example. It's on Founder pre-order right now, ahead of its launch this August. So you can lock in the Founder price today, or simply follow along and pick it up when it's out. Either way, back to the map, because we've got one job left to do, and that's to put all of this to work. Pull up your own map, the real one, the one you already drew, and run it through 4 quick passes. First, just find the features. Don't add a thing yet. Hunt for the 4 shapes we talked about. The gates, meaning your passes and straits, and the one bridge over the big river. The open ground, meaning any border with nothing on it to stop an army. The chokeable rivers, anything 2 territories are forced to share. And the squeezes, the weak strips of land sitting between 2 strong neighbors. If you got a map in progress or even done, you likely drew all of these already. You just never read them as fights. Second, for every charged spot you find, name the 2 sides. Who wants this and who currently has it? That pair, the one who holds it and the one who wants it, with the gate or the river or the strip of good farmland sitting between them, that pair is a war. Notice what happened here. You found it, you didn't make it up. Third, name the grievance. And this is the fun part. What's the moved boundary stone equivalent in this war? The specific thing that tips a quiet pressure into an actual fight. A treaty somebody broke at the gate. Or a dam that just went up on the shared river. The geography is why the tension exists. The grievance is the thing your characters will actually stand in a room and shout about. And fourth, this one matters so you don't drown. Pick one. Out of all the wars you just found hiding in your terrain, choose the single one that presses hardest on your main character and make that the spine of your story. Let the other 3 simmer in the background as faction tension and rumor. Build only the one war the story actually needs, and let the map quietly imply the rest. And that's the whole trick. You didn't invent any of those wars. You found them. They were sitting in the lines the entire time, waiting for you to read them instead of decorate them. That's the part you can't undo. Once you start seeing the fights in the terrain, you genuinely can't stop. The past stops being a pretty squiggle and becomes a flashpoint. That empty border suddenly feels exposed, like a door you forgot to lock. The whole map quits being a drawing and turns into a pressure system you get to play. And your world stops feeling like a backdrop you built and starts feeling like a place that was always quietly already at war. But when the war actually happens, many writers fall into one or several pitfalls that completely ruin their story anyway. So watch this video next, where I cover the most common warfare mistakes and how to avoid them.